I watched the prayer vigil the other night that they had in Newtown, Connecticut, for the victims of the Sandy Hook elementary school shooting, the one where President Obama spoke, and I had mixed feelings about it. The first half of it, the first section of it before the president spoke, was the town clergy, the town religious leaders getting up and taking turns saying prayers. On the one hand, I looked at that and I thought, it's a town that is still in the very raw stages of grief over this completely unanticipated and just unthinkable act of violence. And who am I to begrudge them however they want to handle it? If they take comfort from their religious leaders, if it makes them feel better to have these people come up on stage and bless the town or say prayers or invoke God or whatever, who am I to tell them that there's anything wrong with that? And most of the people, I think the religious leaders who were up on stage that night, they seemed like very sincere, very good people. They're doing what they can to help their community, and for all I know, they're doing a lot of good in that community. They're counseling people. They're helping to guide people through their grief or through their confusion. Maybe helping to explain some very difficult things to the children in the community. I'm sure they're doing a fine job. They should be commended for their work in the community. But then there's another part of me that listens to the things that they were saying that night on stage, listens to the prayers, listens to the things they were saying about God as they variously perceived God, and makes me wonder how much negligence and how much apathy believers are willing to accept from their deity, from the God they believe in. Because one of the first things that the first speaker, and they didn't give anybody's name during the talk, so I didn't know who everybody was, but he was the first guy who spoke. And one of the things he said was that God was with the people of Newtown. God was with the children in school that day. He never left their side, and he will not leave the people of Newtown now as they grieve and they struggle to work their way through this. God is with us. Let not your heart be troubled, for God is with you. That's a very common platitude that Christians and religious folks of all kinds use to soothe themselves in various forms, various phrasings of that. It's the same sort of thing. Oh, don't worry, it's okay. God's got it under control. God is with us. And I wonder what the difference is between a God who is always with you but never does anything, and no God at all. And I know that the people in that town, the people on stage there, those religious leaders, they believe in God. I don't question their sincerity. I take them at face value. They truly believe that the God they speak about is a real thing. He exists. He's really there. He's really here, I suppose. It's like the story of Carl Sagan's Dragon in His Garage, one of my favorite illustrations of the foolishness of superstition and things like that, and the foolishness of these really slippery claims about supernatural events or alien abductions or what have you. It's in the beginning of his book, The Demon Haunted World, where he claims that he has an invisible dragon that lives in his garage, but the dragon leaves no evidence of its existence, doesn't interact with anything, doesn't change anything in the garage. There's no indication just from walking into the garage and looking around that the dragon is even there. And at the end of it, Carl Sagan asks, what is the difference between such a dragon and no dragon at all? And that's the question I ask for believers in God who believe that God is real and was there with those children and is there with the grieving family members and friends and people in that town, but isn't doing anything. What's the difference between that God and no God at all? There's this idea in religion, particularly in Christianity, but I mean in all of the Abrahamic religions, it's there in Judaism and in Islam especially as well, that you should worship God just because He's God. That He doesn't have to do anything to be worthy of your worship, to earn your respect, to earn your love. You should give it to him just because he's there. And that's never made any sense to me. And in fact, it's that kind of thinking that Christopher Hitchens was talking about when he said that to believe in the necessary tenets of Christianity was to wish to be a slave. It's exactly that sort of thing. When people compare it to battered spouse syndrome, it's the same sort of thing. What can God do to you to convince you that he doesn't deserve the love and the worship that you are giving to him? So that bothers me about the religious response, the slavishness of it, the inconceivable mindlessness of it. But also there's what I perceive to be an inconsistency between our common response to viewing that tragedy in religious terms and our common response to viewing that tragedy in political terms. Because reflexively, as soon as news broke of the Sandy Hook shooting, people began to say, oh, how awful, those people are in my prayers, or God is watching over that town. In general, we accept that sort of thing. We expect it. It's just the way people deal with stuff. They see things in religious terms. They feel like they need to pray for people who are victims of tragedies. Whatever, that's just what people do. We accept that. But then we also say, oh, I hate it. I hate it when people view these sorts of things in political terms. Oh, you're going to politicize it. I hate when people politicize tragedy. We're okay with viewing it in religious terms. That's okay. But if you try to view it in political terms, oh, you're just an insensitive asshole. How could you? Have you no decency, sir, to politicize the deaths of these poor innocent children? How could you? How could you do that? There's more than one way to politicize something. If you try to politicize a tragedy in a very selfish, opportunistic way, I do have a problem with that. I do understand why people are very offended by that. And I think of during the 2004 presidential election where Dick Cheney implied during one of the vice presidential debates, I think, or maybe during one of his campaign stops. I can't remember specifically. But he strongly implied that if he and George W. Bush, if their administration were not reelected, that it would increase the likelihood that the United States would be the site of another 9/11 style terrorist attack. That sort of politicizing a tragedy, playing on the memories and the fears of 9/11, which at the time had occurred less than 3 years before, in order to bolster your political campaign, that I have a problem with. But there's another kind of politicizing a tragedy which uses the tragedy as a starting point, which uses it to compel meaningful political action. And I don't see why anyone has a problem with that. I don't see how that's insensitive at all. I think it's only insensitive if you fear like your own political position will be threatened by it. And if you're in a political position or you hold a political view that that puts you at odds with the types of reforms that would come out of a tragedy like Sandy Hook, then I really don't think your political philosophy is really worth all that much respect. If you look at events like the Sandy Hook shooting or the shooting in Colorado earlier this year at the Dark Knight Rises premiere, or the assassination attempt of Congressman Giffords, or Columbine, take your pick, the shooting at the Amish school, just pick one. If you don't think that events like those are reasons to consider serious reform of our gun policy in this country, if you honestly believe that events like those, or the incredible frequency of incidents of gun violence in this country as opposed to other countries in the world is not a reason for serious gun control reform in this country, if you really think that the Second Amendment is all we need, and that the Second Amendment, as the NRA has said, is this benevolent umbrella of protection over the American people, and that the best thing that we could do is to allow as many firearms into the hands of as many citizens as possible, you're not living in the fucking world, man. You're not really here. You're not looking at things as they are. You are not accepting reality. And what's especially frustrating about the aftermath of events like these, and even events like on a much bigger scale, like 9/11, is that it's not that we don't react. It's not that Americans and our political machine and our culture, etc., is incapable of reacting to these horrific events. We're very willing to take action. We just react in the wrong way. We take the wrong action. We overreact, and we don't even overreact in the right direction. There's a horrible school shooting, and dozens of students are killed, and it's a horrible tragedy that dominates our national conversation for weeks and months. And what do? We install metal detectors in the school. We sell, my friend Varjak, Chris Grebe, put a thing on his Facebook wall just the morning that I'm taping this about how sales of children's body armor are starting to rise in the wake of the Sandy Hook shooting. We put body armor on children. We make it harder for people to get into the school. That's how we respond. That's how we respond. We don't, and the suggestion that we might address the problem from the angle of let's try to make it more difficult for people to get their hands on deadly firearms. Oh, that's an extreme position. When you look at other countries in the world who have a much lower incidence of gun violence, they haven't gotten there because they've armed more of their citizens. They haven't gotten there because they've put metal detectors in public places. They haven't gotten there because parents have become ultra protective of their kids. They've gotten there because they have addressed the proliferation and the availability of firearms in their country. That's how they've done it. When you look at countries like Japan or like Germany or like Australia or like the United Kingdom, where their incidents of gun violence are much lower than they are here in the United States, it's because they have serious gun control measures imposed throughout the country. Banning assault weapons, to me, makes absolute sense. Banning high-capacity magazines, to me, makes absolute sense. I don't understand why a civilian needs to have those types of weapons in his hands. My brother owns an AK-47. Why? Why does my brother own an AK-47? I've asked him that. His answer is because he wanted an AK-47. And I love my brother, and I do think he is one of the people that could probably be trusted with the weapon. I mean, he's not a reckless, he and I have grown up around guns our whole lives. He's not a reckless person. He's probably not going to shoot someone or to allow someone else to get their hands on his gun and go shoot someone. He's not the problem. And yet, I don't think he should be allowed to have that gun. Not because he can't be trusted with it, but because overall, in general, the idea of just letting people buy assault rifles just makes no sense to me. I don't see why that's a good thing when you view it from the level of public safety. Why is this allowed? Why is this a good thing? I don't get it. If you want a gun for home protection, I think that's fine. I think the same rule should apply. I think you should be licensed. You should be required to have a permit for it. You should be required to demonstrate to the license granting body of the government that you know how to use that gun in a proper, safe way. I think trigger guards, I think locking the gun up somehow in your house should be a part of our law. I think these things are necessary. And I think they're necessary not only for the practical reasons of the public safety concerns, but also because we have to do something to break this thrall that so many people in this country have with guns. It makes no sense to me at all that for so many people in the United States, they perceive gun ownership as the highest expression of their liberty. And that baffles me. That absolutely baffles me, that we live in a country of over 300 million people, where for the most part, people are free to come and go as they please. Most people will never have the experience of being stopped by a police officer and asked for ID. Most people will not have the experience of having their home searched by a government agent. Most people who live in this country, the overwhelming majority of people who live in this country, will never have that experience. And yet, the concept of having your right to own a gun limited is equated in their minds with being stripped of their liberty. I don't understand it. And I know that gun control is not the answer to prevent these sorts of things from happening ever again. We are never going to be able to guarantee that mass shootings like this never take place, even if we institute much stricter gun control. And yes, I'm very well aware that Anders Breivik lived in a country where the gun control laws were much stricter than they are here in the United States, and he was still able to perpetrate a horrible massacre. But I also note that his country has not suffered another such horrible massacre since his. Whereas here in the United States, we've had 3 or 4 of them just this year. We do live in a free society, and that is not something I am willing to change. That's not something I am willing to sacrifice to make it the kind of society where a Newtown will never ever happen. There is a certain point where we do have to accept that these things can happen, and that the law will not be able to protect us 100% of the time. And that is something that I say in personal conversations to people about this a lot. But that is not the same thing as saying, well, no law is ever going to prevent this completely, so we just should not do anything. There is a larger problem that is evident, that needs to be addressed. That problem is in the proliferation of firearms in this country. That problem is in the availability of firearms to people in this country. That problem is in the veneration of firearms by lots of people in this country, by the almost religious devotion, the fetishization of gun ownership by a lot of people in this country. Guns don't kill people. People kill people. That is true. But by the same logic, explosives don't kill people. And yet you can't go into a sporting goods store and buy as much dynamite as you want. You can't go into a sporting goods store and buy dynamite at all. Why don't we regulate guns in the same way? Why don't we regulate guns in the same way? And you may say, well, because the right to gun ownership is in the Constitution, and the right to explosives ownership is not in the Constitution. Very well. The Second Amendment was written and ratified in the late 18th century, before the invention of the Colt revolver, before the invention of the self-contained metal black powder cartridge, before the invention of semi-automatic and automatic weapons, before the invention of the repeating rifle, even. Why are we bound by an 18th century interpretation of an 18th century constitutional amendment? We already broaden our interpretation of the Second Amendment to the point that we ban ordinary civilians from, say, purchasing heavy military hardware. The Second Amendment says the right to bear arms shall not be infringed, but we infringe it to the point that we say you can't just be anybody and go out and buy a fully armed tank. You can't just be anybody and go out and buy an armed cruise missile. You can't do that. Your right to bear those arms is most definitely infringed upon, and that only makes sense. That's just reasonable and rational. Why don't we extend our interpretation, broaden our interpretation of the Second Amendment to include assault rifles, to include high-capacity ammunition magazines? Why don't we broaden it just a bit more to cover those things, and to say that it's not only unreasonable to allow civilians to own weapons of mass destruction, it's also unreasonable to allow civilians to get their hands on these weapons of mass murder, these weapons that can be used to fire a bullet every time you squeeze the trigger, to literally murder dozens of people in the space of a few seconds. They have no legitimate civilian purpose. There's no reason for a person who wants to defend his home from intruders, in the incredibly unlikely event that your home will be invaded by intruders. There's no reason why, if you want to defend against that astronomical possibility, that you need a semi-automatic assault rifle. There's no reason for that. There's no reason why you need a magazine that can feed that assault rifle dozens of rounds without having to reload. There's no reason for that. To allow everyone to have the potential to own that sort of a weapon is insanity. It is absolute madness. And I hope that we can finally get to a point where we will actually have this conversation. We will actually have meaningful movement in the direction of some common sense gun control reforms. I hope that that's the case. I hope that the damning silence of the NRA and the official gun rights lobby in general in the wake of the Sandy Hook shooting, I hope it continues. I hope they keep quiet. Because then we can actually get something done. Then we can pass the kinds of reforms that should have been passed in this country decades ago. If they wanted to talk, if the NRA wanted to come out and actually have a meaningful conversation and work toward a compromise, we might be able to come up with some common sense gun control legislation that they could live with and that people opposed to them could live with. That would be fine too. That would be better than what we have. But if they want to keep quiet, if they want to sit in silence and take down their Facebook pages and their Twitter accounts and just not say a word in the wake of this and hang their heads in shame, for they should be ashamed, that's fine. We'll do it without you. But I hope that we do it. That's the point. I really, really hope that we do it.